Hey, good morning and welcome to the Stahls TV Morning Show. I'm Josh Ellsworth and I'll be your host for this morning, and we're starting a little bit late because we have had that dreaded thing called technical difficulties, and we're still having them. So the plan for today was to walk you through a new tool called our Ultimate Heat Transfer Vinyl Cost Calculator. And so you can still access that tool, and I'm going to show you how, and I'm going to explain the framework of how we've built that calculator. And later today, we're going to publish a video that shows you exactly how to use that calculator, because right now, I'm not able to share what's on my computer screen here with you out there, but that's okay. I can explain the framework, the thinking that went into it. It'll still be a valuable 15, 20, 25 minutes together today with the questions that you have. So Robert, welcome. Thanks for joining this morning. If you're watching, I'd ask you to shout out where you're watching from. We're excited that we have people from all over the world that tune in and plan for this every other Monday for the Stahls TV Morning Show, so we don't want to disappoint. One thing I do have today for you is some looks of the week. I spent some time scrolling through the Stahls Facebook page and our Show and Tell Saturday, and I have what are three really cool collections, I would say, of looks. So let's go ahead and roll the first one here. So Lisa Vanoy has submitted this, and I think this is really cool because it combines a variety of CAD cut designs all in the same theme for this Patriots team and the drum line specifically. And so if you look up in the very top hand left of the picture that Lisa has shared with us, you will see a nice two-color left chest graphic out of what looks like glitter flake and fashion film or premium plus, which is just a standard heat transfer vinyl, I'm guessing. And then you'll also see right below that is a close-up of the Patriots sleeve print. And so with a heat printing pillow that's for sleeve and legs, or with a special platen for your heat press for sleeves and legs, these sleeve prints can become very easy to do. And we actually have a dual sleeve platen now that will load even for those of you with auto clams that don't take the normal sleeve platen and allow you to do two sleeves at once. A little narrower print area than the 6x20 inch that's on our standard Fusion or Air Fusion sleeve platen, but nonetheless a great opportunity for decorating sleeve placements. So I love this collection. I like the idea of packaging products together or launching a spiritware sale with all of these products in it. So nice work, Lisa. Thanks for sharing your work with us. Our next collection here, and this one's really cool because it shows a couple concepts. One is maximizing the artwork that you create, which is a really cool thing. So once you spend the time to create this vector artwork for, in this case, a church, changing the color of what you're going to cut from that artwork in your heat transfer vinyl product selection, or even changing the size or the print location, which would be another good use of this artwork. Once you've spent the time to create the artwork, leverage that artwork, same artwork, as many ways as you can. And so I love this submitted by Aaron Mills because it shows that decorated across, I think if I count correctly, 10 different onesies. So not only are we seeing a cool design for a church, but we're also understanding that decorating infant apparel or baby apparel is a potential market. And this is from our Sport Film Light product Aaron shared on the Facebook page, which is great for cutting and weeding and quick application of single color designs. And the other cool thing about this is we'll have a video that Joe is working on, we just talked about this morning, that Jenna created, showing decorating onesies from the brand Rabbit Skin. So children's apparel is a segment that some are leveraging, some are not. Most of the materials from Stahls are CPSIA compliant, just like Sport Film is, which means they don't contain lead or phthalates. It's safe to decorate even children's apparel and still meet compliance for those kids under 12. So thanks for submitting, Aaron. And for our last bit of work here, I love this blank garment from Badger that Kelly shared. So Kelly Smith submitted this, and these are all of the customization zones on one garment. So on the top hand right, we're seeing a traditional front placement layered with CAD cut heat transfer film. We see down in the bottom left, the anchor down word mark, a really nice oversized print that's completed on the back of the hoodie. You'll notice that it is placed a little lower, which is a nice pickup from this. So when that hood is not worn in the upright position, it's not going to cover the design. So that's a placement tip. And then the middle bottom, you'll see the bleed blue. That's an actual customization zone on the hood, which is another great branding opportunity. And on the right is another sleeve print. And so when Kelly shared this photo, I believe she sold this garment for around $60 to $70. With all of these customization zones, she cited that it cost around $30 to $35 to create. So those are great profit margins. That's a nice markup. That's a lot of profit for every garment being decorated. And hey, if you can generate the profit on one hoodie instead of having to print 10 t-shirts and make the same amount of profit, why not focus on the higher end items? So I want to thank Lisa, Aaron, and Kelly for submitting and sharing their work with us. If you'd like to submit, all you need to do is follow our Stahls All Things Heat Printing Facebook page. You're probably watching from that location right now. And share your work with us on Saturday. Call out what you've decorated, be inspired by other decorators, and share your work with them. So I'd love these looks and plenty others that were shared this Saturday on our Facebook page. You can also tag us on Instagram at Stahls Heat Printing if you'd like to share your work there. So looks like we have Mike watching from Canada, a regular viewer. Welcome back, Mike. Brandy watching from our hometown of our headquarters, Michigan. And we have Jan also from Ontario watching, Eric from Pennsylvania. That's where we're broadcasting from, down in the very southwest corner of Pennsylvania in a small town called Uniontown, where we're from. Toledo, Ohio. Tim, I'll actually be, I'll drive through Toledo here in a couple weeks on my way to our headquarters in Detroit. And we have called out Robert already watching. So good. We have a nice collection of folks to talk about calculating cost with heat transfer vinyl. So when we are calculating cost for any product, but we'll focus in on heat transfer vinyl, there are three major factors to those costs. Does anybody want to chime in and guess what some of those factors are? So I'm looking for three major factors in calculating costs. If you want to chime in and guess those factors. We have Connie watching from Illinois, Brenda watching from North Carolina, so all over the place. Everybody's still shouting out where they're watching from, so I'll give you the three factors. They are cost of materials, which most people get, so they want to know, if I have a 10 by 10 inch design, how much is that going to cost me to make? So I hear that question all the time. So cost of materials are a big part. The other piece is labor. So we hear that. I'm not paying myself to do this work. It's one of the most common problems in our industry. So labor is a big factor. And then the last one, which is missed more often than labor, is overhead. So cost of materials, labor, and overhead are the three factors that we want to put into our cost equation when we're making anything in business, frankly, whether it's a custom t-shirt with heat transfer vinyl or any other product that you are manufacturing and selling in business. Those are the three factors that need to go into the cost. And so when you look at these, I really like to segment these three factors into two different buckets. You have what's called direct expenses, and then you have indirect expenses. So direct expenses are those expenses that go into actually manufacturing the product. And so in a heat transfer vinyl design, we have heat transfer vinyl that is used to make the product. We have the cost of our shirt. Those are going to be our two most popular cost of materials for this workflow. And then we're also going to have the labor. So when I say labor, I'm not talking about labor for your time selling or what you're paying your marketing or salesperson. I'm talking about the labor, the people that are working and actually loading the vinyl cutter, weeding the product, heat applying the product. Those are our direct labor expenses because they go into making the actual product. So again, we're looking for direct expenses, that is labor and cost of materials in this process, the t-shirt, the vinyl, as well as the labor to create it. And then under that other bucket of indirect expenses, that's where we have this broad bucket that is overhead. And so there are a lot of things that can go into that overhead calculation. I alluded to some of them just a moment ago. It could be sales and marketing expense. So all your money that's going to your advertising campaigns or your salespeople commissions, anything like that. Those are sort of front office expenses. They're not going into the direct manufacturing expenses, so those are viewed as indirect expenses. They're not directly attributable to making your product. Some other indirect expenses that people often miss are things like utilities. So electricity, you got to have lights, right? To make the product, your machine plugs in and pulls electricity to be able to heat print product. That all falls into indirect expenses. Whether you're operating out of a retail storefront, your own shop, or even a bedroom in your house, I usually like to recommend that you try to separate some portion of your utility bill, even for home-based businesses, and attribute that to your business. And that's going to fall into that indirect or overhead category. The other big thing in indirect expenses, this is usually the biggest, is your lease. If you're paying for a physical location, odds are that lease payment is your highest total of your indirect expenses, unless you're carrying a lot of front office labor like sales, marketing, administrative, etc. For larger mid-sized businesses, that category kind of takes over. But if you're just a small one to three person operation, typically your lease is your most expensive figure that falls into indirect expenses. So you need to have a good understanding of that because that's going to go into our cost calculating equation. And again, the calculator is going to make it simple. I actually have the Facebook thread up right now, so I'm going to go ahead and post a link in this comment string where you can click and fill out a form and download the calculator. Again, you'll be able to watch a video that'll publish later today that we'll share in this thread on exactly how to populate this detail, but you need to have this background knowledge. And so going old school, I have a whiteboard here that we're going to go to, and we're going to do some drawing and draw this stuff out for you. Hopefully we'll be able to get a good zoom on it. I think we will. Perfect. Got it. So those were very important to know, because what I like to do is recommend that you incorporate your overhead as a percentage of each job. And so this is a very popular way to calculate overhead, because you want to make sure that overhead is attributed to every job that you're doing. That way it's captured. So at the end of a month or the end of a year when you're selling all this product, that you're making the profit that you want, and it's not just getting sucked up by overhead and all of those indirect expenses that we talked about. So in order to apply it to every job, I like to find overhead as a percentage, right? Because then it allocates to your direct expenses for every job. So this is an equation that's going to allow you to get to overhead as a percentage for your particular shop. So what you're going to do is you're going to take all of those indirect expenses that we talked about. You're going to add up your lease, your front office wages, your utilities, and you guys can brainstorm a list of everything else that falls into here. But you're going to create that whole list of indirect expenses, and you're going to add it up for X period of time. And so that X period of time, the longer it can get, the better. If it can be a snapshot of a whole year, that's great, but that's a heck of a lot of work. You guys are pulling all your stuff together for your business taxes, so it'd probably be a great time to do that right now. But if you're just starting, it can even be a month in time, but that needs to be a typical month where it's a typical spend. That way you can make sure it's calculated correctly. So add up your lease, everything for 1 month's time, and get that total here. So let's just say if I have, I'm going to make my math really easy, $1,000 lease. I'm going to add that to, let's just say $200 in utilities, and let's say $500 in advertising budget, etc. I'm going to get a grand total of $1,700 in indirect expenses for that typical month in time. Okay? Now, for that same month in time, you need to factor in your direct expenses. So how much in production labor have you paid out? And so when we did our cost calculator survey, you guys, if you went to that link, you know there's a huge form, not a huge, about 10 questions that you need to fill out in order to download that calculator. Unless you're logged into your Stahls account, then you get it without filling out all the info. But the thing I like about filling out the info is we ask you, how much are you paying your heat press operator? How much are you paying your vinyl cutter employee? And the secret is last year, 2019, for those that completed the survey, the average price that people were paying those particular jobs were about $13.35 per hour each for the role. And so over the course of a month's time, if you're employing that person, and it's a dedicated person for 8 hours a day times 40-hour work weeks, you start to do the math and add it up, right? And so I'm going to operate with $10 an hour just so I can do the math in my head. And basically, I'm looking at $400 in labor expenses for the heat press weeding operator. Let's say one person is able to do both for the size of my shop. I'm going to be paying that a week. multiply that by 4 weeks, and I'm going to look at $1,600 in labor expenses for that month. Of course, you want to calculate your insurance and everything as well. That's going to go over top of that, but I just wanted to kind of map this out for you. And then let's say I bought my materials. Let's say I bought, to do that amount of work, I bought, $2,000 in T-shirts and vinyl to be able to do the particular jobs that are there. Let's say I also, $2,000 in labor and vinyl. That'd be a pretty slow month for somebody that has these type of expense, but you'll get the point and we'll be able to do the equation. So add everything up that goes into the equation together, and then basically I'm going to take my indirect expenses divided by my direct expenses, and that looks like about 45% or so without having a calculator. So I'm going to be operating with, it'll be times 100, which would give me somewhere around 45% in overhead if this were a typical month for me. That's pretty high, and so what that would suggest is that as a business, you need to get more sales, more direct expenses to be able to facilitate this storefront. 45% is a pretty high overhead. After we've run this calculator and got feedbacks from shop, we're finding most small businesses have their overhead rate somewhere between 15 and 25% if they're allocating it correctly in a pretty successful business. But the point is we're trying to get to whatever this overhead rate is to be able to apply to every sale. And so let's park that for a moment, and I'm going to look to see if there's questions here. Yeah, Blaine has a comment. Yeah, seems cost when labor is figured in would be a lot more than $35. So Blaine's referencing back to that blue shirt we showed earlier. Can you bring that image up again? That ombre look of the week on that blue hoodie. So Blaine's referencing that seems like the cost to decorate this may be a lot more than $35. Could possibly be. And so the calculator, we'd be able to figure that out. We would take and do that equation. So let's park that one. Let's try to figure out what this actually costs the manual way. The calculator will actually make it a lot easier for us. So while we're still looking at the image here, I'm going to guess the sizes of the designs that we have here since we're operating on the fly this morning due to some technical difficulties. So the top right design, I'm going to guess, what do you think, Joe? That's probably about 10 by 12 for the blue part is what we're going to estimate on that. So I'm going to say 10 by 12 in blue material there. And for the white design going across, I'm going to say that's a good, because it's on a diagonal, probably about 5 by 12 for the white material. Let's go down to the bottom left. For our other blue material that we see there, I'm going to guess again that's probably about 10 by 12. And then the white or silver design underneath it is probably about 8 by 12. The bleed blue on the side of the hood, I'm going to guess that's somewhere around probably 3 by, maybe 4 by 6, let's say. So that's 4 by 6. And then the sleeve print, let's see, our whole platen is 6 by 20, so I'm going to guess that one on the sleeve print is probably about 3 by, let's say 12. So, and then this is my blue material, and this is my white material. All right, so we're going to flip back to the board. I just wrote down all of those sizes real quick for us to work with. So in the blue material, here are my design dimensions, and in the white material, here are my design dimensions. And so usually what somebody would do is they would say 10 by 12, the material costs about a penny a square inch, so that's going to cost me $1.20 for that layer. And I think that's a great way to kind of thumb it if you're looking just to do something quick and you're out in the field or need to do something on a fly. But what that fails to calculate, of course, is the labor and overhead, which we've talked about at length already, but it also fails to calculate the waste. And so when you download that calculator, we've actually added about a 15% waste factor to it, knowing that if you're selling jobs, sometimes the waste is more, sometimes it's less. It depends on how you can gang those designs across your roll of heat transfer vinyl. And so a good example that I have here that I'm going to pull over and show you is let's say we're cutting this neon pink design across this white material, across this roll, so you can visualize it. On this particular design, if I had a job for 2 of these, I'd be able to do 2 across, right? And there's going to be waste out on the end of the roll. There's no way to save that. And even when you load your roll into the vinyl cutter and lock the pinch rollers down, you're going to have a bit of waste. Now, if it's a job for 12 of these, all of a sudden I'm rotating them, and I'm able to make much more efficient utilization of my material, fitting 6 of these across times 2 rows and greatly reduce my waste. So you can get really crazy with cost calculation with how this fits on every roll. I usually like to recommend that you just add a waste factor to it. You can change that factor in the cost calculator, but 15% seems to be a good average for waste, and the calculator does take that into effect. And so when we're looking back at this, I am going to have to use some basic assumptions here. We're going to have about 120 square inches here. I'm going to have 60 square inches here, which will be a total of 180 square inches. Here I'm going to have another 120 square inches, 96 square inches, 24, 36. So when I'm adding everything together, 216, 236, 240, 276 here. And here I'm looking at 180. And so if I do, am I right, Joe?
Yeah, 456.
So 456 total square inches. So basically, when you look at the whole job, we got 456 square inches. Do me a favor and multiply that by 1.15, which will be my 15% waste.
980.4.
That's not correct. Sorry. I should have said 0.0. So it's $4.56 at a penny a square inch, and we need to add 15% to that. I'm going to have to go grab the calculator here in a second. You should see the movements he's making behind the... He's going to punch it. So $4.56, we're going to have about
$5.25.
That sounds right, yeah. So there's going to be about 5 1/4 in material there. So we have 5 1/4 in our material costs. That's going to be the expense for this. And then the question we need to ask is, how long does it take to cut, weed, and apply every design? And so when you go through the calculator, it's going to say, on average, how long does this design, the designs that make up this, take to cut? So let's show the picture one more time. And this is cutting and weeding all together. So if I take my design placements here, I can say that on average, cutting and weeding, these aren't particularly difficult designs to weed. So we could say these cost, take about 2 minutes per design to weed. Some of you would say, oh, that takes me 4 minutes. Some would be able to get these done in less than 60 seconds each. So if we just ballpark it at about 2 minutes per cut design, I think that's a good way to go. And knowing that there's 6 cut designs times 2 minutes, I'm going to have about 12 minutes in labor for the cutting process. And then we're going to figure out that rate based on paying $10 an hour. The other thing that the calculator is going to ask is, how long does it take to apply each design on average in minutes? So if you're looking at all these, you'll know that the application needs to take into account your loading of the garment as well. So if we say in total, I can even run a hoodie and press it and say, on average, I'm going to be able to make this hoodie with changing out the platens and everything. The total time to be able to make one hoodie is going to be about 10 minutes. So if I say that, 10 minutes and I had 6 cut designs, so I'll just do 10 divided by 6, it's going to take me about 1.5 minutes on average. So I'm going to say 2 minutes again per cut design. So ultimately, I'm going to have 12 minutes in the application based on 2 minutes per cut design and 12 minutes in the weeding. And so the calculator, what that would do is when you would punch in those factors, it would calculate your labor rate that you've entered into heat application and weeding down to the minute, and it would apply it for you. So in this case, if I'm paying $10 an hour, it's going to basically be at a rate of about 17 cents a minute times 12 minutes. So I'm going to have about $2.04 in the weeding and about $2.04 in the application, and that's for every garment. So my materials were 5 1/4. My labor is going to be $4.08 based on adding those together. Okay? And so what the calculator will do, it'll say that's $9.33 for your direct expenses in that particular case. Now, how overhead comes in, it'll take those two numbers and it will multiply that by your overhead rate, whatever that is. Earlier we calculated 45%, yours may be 15 or 20%. That's why it's important that you do the calculation for your shop. We can't tell you what the overhead rate is for your shop. But the point is, often, as in this case, the overhead can be a pretty substantial number. So if the garment's going to cost us $9.33, and we're going to multiply that by the overhead rate, we're going to have another $4.20 in overhead at this 45% overhead. So that's going to be a total cost of the garment of $13.52. Now, for those of you that are following, you're going to know I missed a major thing there in doing this quick calculation on the fly, and that is the cost of my blank. Okay? The cost of the blank is going to be the majority of the cost, and I have to include that before I multiply it by my overhead. So I'm going to correct myself there because the overhead would actually be much higher. So let's say I have my vinyl and my labor to create the vinyl and heat apply the vinyl, but the cost of the blank. I don't know what that garment costs, but I'm guessing that's a pretty premium garment. So I'm going to guess that that garment costs, let's just say $20 to make my math easy. And I'm sure it varies based on the quantity that you're buying them in. So now I have $29.33 in direct expenses. So $29.33 times my overhead rate of 0.45 equals $13.20 in overhead based on my shop factor. So that's why it's really important to include that overhead rate, because that's going to cover all of your indirect expenses and make sure you're covered at a business. So when you're done, overall that garment's going to cost $42.52. So back to Blaine's comment. Yeah, we're not bad. I mean, $35, I don't know the shop's overhead rate that posted it and all the exact factors that went into the design, but we're about $7 over that when we ran through and did the cost calculation. So hopefully this gives you an idea. If you're like, wow, my head's spinning and this is confusing, it's because it is confusing. But the main thing that the cost calculator is going to do for you, which we shared the link further up in the thread, is it's going to make this easy for you. So all of the math that's happening in the background, you can know that when you use the cost calculator, as long as you put in the hourly rate that you're paying your heat press operator and your weeding operator, if you're doing them yourself, pay yourself, because you're going to want to replace yourself at one point. That's what we've been hearing on our podcast is, I want to hire, but I don't know how. Well, the first way on how to hire is make sure you factored in labor into your cost so you can grow the shop and it's scalable. So it's going to make you punch in those numbers. It's going to make you punch in the overhead rate. You're going to save that as your version for your shop. And then every time you get a job, you're just going to be able to go in and punch in how much you think it'll take to weed per design, heat apply per design, and the sizing of your design. And it'll automatically kick out a cost for all of the materials that are sold by Stahls. And it will say, here's how much that would cost in Premium Plus. And you know what? We're going to tell you how much that costs in Glitter Flake as well. So if you want to try to upsell the customer, you'll see that it doesn't really cost you that much more to move the product to a premium finish. And maybe instead of commanding $60 on the hoodie, I could have commanded $70, right? Or give an option of good, better, best when I present it. And so all of these things work together. I'm going to make sure I stop and take some questions because that was a lot of detail that went in there. So the question from Gene is, do you take into account time to receive the order, unpack, and then pack it up for delivery? So it's not factored. So when you say receive the order, you mean actually receiving the blanks in to the warehouse or wherever it goes, rather than actually writing the order out in the field. So that's how I'm going to take that comment, because if it were writing the order out in the field, that would fall into overhead under indirect expenses. But you're right, receiving, unpacking, and packing it up are factors that need to flow into my direct expenses, my manufacturing labor. That's not calculated in here. So what I would do is we've tried to calculate the major factors, which are weeding and heat application and making heat transfer vinyl jobs. We feel like that's 95% of the work. You may want to add a little bit of a factor to your time averages on those to be able to compensate for putting everything together at the end. So that's how we factor labor into the process, is how many minutes does it take per garment. So you could put some fraction of minutes on your heat application time or your weeding time to be able to compensate for that. But that's a good piece of feedback. Maybe we'll include that on a future update. And this is a good question from Brian. Does it take shipping cost into account? And so what the calculator has, it has little helpers throughout that when you hover on it, it'll give you a description of what is factored in. And usually I like to factor in shipping as a cost of materials. You can do it in different ways for your shop. You can put all your shipping and overhead, but I love it as cost of materials because especially if you're ordering on demand and replenishing. And so we put in a average per square foot price for the material, or per square linear yard, not square linear yard, or per yard of material. And there's a tab that's material cost. What you would want to do is you would want to enter the landed cost for the material as far as you factor it in. So on the apparel, again, you're going to put that blank, this blank cost me $10. If I ordered 10 of them and it cost $20 to ship it to me, all of a sudden I need to factor in this blank now cost me $12 because of the shipping cost into me. So I'd bury that in your cost of material as a factor. All right. I don't see the link, so I'm just going to reshare the link here in the thread, so you guys will get another copy of that. Should show up into the thread any second here. Blaine asks, good to think when doing a 2-color print is 2 presses, so the hoodie is a total of 6 presses done on the 4 locations. Yes, so basically how the calculator calculates it is we say per placement. So when you're saying how long do you think it will take you to weed or heat press, it's per placement. So if I'm doing, I have some sample garments here so I could explain this point. So with heat transfer vinyl, this is going to be 2 placements, right? Because I have the red layer and the glitter black layer. This is going to be a 3rd placement on the back. So we're going to ask you in the calculator per placement. Something like this, even though it's 2 colors, it's going to ask you what is your average time per placement. And so that's really per layer of vinyl, whether those layers are stacked on each other or whether those layers are in completely different locations on the garment. So the calculator does explain that and call it out. Very important. And honestly, if you find yourself doing a lot of 3+ color work, this calculator also calculates the cost as if you had a print cut machine, if you printed it all on one layer, weeded once, and masked. So you'll see pretty quickly on, man, these 4-color jobs are costing me this much in fashion film, and I can do them, and I can continue to do them, but if I move that down to print cut, my cost of materials are going to reduce, and then of course your factors of your number of layers will reduce, which will save you tons of time with labor, especially in the weeding and the heat application process, which are the majority. So that's why a lot of people will move to a printer cutter or even a digital screen printed transfer like we have on the wall behind me once you hit a certain quantity and certain number of colors. All right, Mike, I am going to update the file and include a version for Stahls Canada. So we're going to do some currency conversion for you over the next, I will say, couple weeks to give myself a little bit of time, but we're definitely doing a version for Canada. All right, can we scroll back up the thread and just make sure there's no additional questions? So again, thanks for getting detailed on cost calculation with me today. I think we have the majority of the questions answered. If you missed the majority of the show, you'll want to go back and watch from the beginning as we explained all of the background thinking that goes into creating our ultimate heat transfer vinyl cost calculator. Make sure you look for our video that'll publish later today that'll actually walk you through using that calculator, and there's a link in the conversation thread here that will allow you to download it. I would also encourage you to like and subscribe to us on our YouTube channel, which you just need to search for Stahls TV or go to youtube.com/StahlsTV. and that you'll always get the videos first when you like that channel and you subscribe to it. We publish, I'd say, several videos a week that are designed to help you grow your business. So I'll stick around and keep an eye out for questions as we complete, and want to thank you for joining me on this Stahls TV Morning Show.